The Whitmore family did not simply host dinners. They curated them, the way a museum curates an exhibition, every element chosen for its effect, every placement deliberate, every detail a quiet statement about who mattered and who didn't. I smoothed the front of my dress in the back seat of the town car my mother-in-law had arranged. Midnight blue crepe, structured shoulders, the kind of dress that cost more than I'd spent on clothes in an entire year before I married my husband. It was appropriate, I'd been told, appropriate for the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala at the Hammersley Club, appropriate for the evening my husband James was being formally introduced as the Foundation's new executive director. Appropriate for the first time I would stand beside him in front of the full constellation of his family's world. I thought of my parents, somewhere in the My-Town traffic behind us. My mother in the lilac dress she'd bought after 2 weeks of deliberation, texting me photos from the dressing room. My father in the suit he'd worn to my college graduation, cleaned and pressed. They'd driven 4 hours from Dayton because I asked them to. Because this night was supposed to be ours, all of ours. I'd made that clear to my mother-in-law 6 weeks ago when she handed me the invitation list with that careful smile of hers. My parents are coming, I'd said. Of course, she'd said. Of course they are. The Hammersley Club occupied the top 3 floors of a building on East 67th Street. The elevator opened directly into a foyer of pale marble and enormous flowers that probably had a name I didn't know. Women in jewels I couldn't identify were greeting each other with the specific warmth of people who had attended the same boarding schools and summer the same island. My husband's hand rested at the small of my back, guiding me through hellos. "This is Nora," he said each time. Nora, James's wife. People smiled. Their eyes did a rapid practice scan. I was used to the scan. I'd been doing this for 2 years of marriage. My mother-in-law materialized beside me in a column of champagne-colored silk that probably cost what my parents had paid for their minivan. Catherine Whitmore was 61 years old and had never once looked it. She had the bone structure and the bearing of someone who had been told from birth that rooms were hers to own. "You look lovely," she said to me, her cheek brushing the air near mine. Then she turned to direct a server about the placement of something on a far table, and I was dismissed. I touched my husband's arm. "Where are my parents sitting?" He frowned faintly, scanning the room. The seating chart was on a gilded board near the entrance, names in calligraphy. I'd seen it when we walked in but hadn't been close enough to read it. "With us," he said. "I arranged it with Mom's assistant last week. They'll be at table 2, right next to the foundation board." I nodded, some wire of anxiety in my chest loosening. "Okay. Good." The cocktail hour moved as cocktail hours do, in a slow, glittering rotation of small plates and smaller talk. I found myself separated from my husband somewhere between the smoked salmon and the second-string quartet piece, standing next to a woman named Bitsy who spent 11 minutes explaining the difference between 2 types of charitable giving structures in a tone that suggested I should be grateful for the education. I smiled and nodded, and watched the entrance for my parents. They arrived at 7:22. I could see my mother's eyes doing the same thing mine had done 20 minutes earlier, taking in the marble, the flowers, the level of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. My father had his hand at her elbow, steady as always. I crossed the room to them. "You made it," I said, hugging my mother tight. She smelled like the perfume she'd worn since I was 8. "Sweetheart," my mother breathed, pulling back to look at me. "This place? Your father almost turned the car around twice." My father laughed, that quiet rumble of his. "Beautiful spot," he said. "Real beautiful." He was looking at the ceiling, at the intricate plasterwork with the genuine appreciation of a man who'd spent 30 years in construction. He knew how hard it was to make something like that. I loved him so much in that moment. I had to look away. I linked my arm through my mother's and started to steer them toward where I'd last seen my husband. "We need to find our seats," I said. "We're at table 2. "Excuse me." The voice came from beside me, one of Catherine's assistants, a young woman named Margot who communicated exclusively in pleasant, apologetic tones. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Mrs. Whitmore Sr. wanted me to let you know that Mr. and Mrs. Brecker's seats have been adjusted slightly. There was a last-minute change to the table configuration. My mother looked at me. I kept my expression even. What kind of change? Margot smiled carefully. Mr. and Mrs. Brecker will be in the garden room this evening. It's a lovely space, very intimate, and they'll have a wonderful view of the terrace. Mrs. Whitmore thought they might be more comfortable there, given the main room can get quite loud during the speeches. The garden room. I knew the garden room. I had been given a full tour of the club by Catherine's assistant 3 weeks ago, the kind of tour that masquerades as helpfulness but is actually an orientation in hierarchy. The garden room was a smaller private dining space accessed through a hallway off the main event floor. It was technically still in the building. It was also very clearly not the gala. My mother's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on my arm. My father had gone very still in the way he got still when he was deciding whether to say something. They'll be in the main room, I said, my voice pleasant, each word deliberate. With me. At table 2. Margot's smile held, professional and practiced. I totally understand, and I'm sorry for any confusion. Mrs. Whitmore felt the seating reconfiguration was for the best flow of the evening. I can show Mr. and Mrs. Brecker to the garden room now if you'd like. There's a full bar and appetizers. She looked at my parents when she said the last part, which told me everything about what kind of offer this was. Excuse me for just a moment, I said to my parents. My voice was the voice I used in client meetings when something had gone sideways and I needed 10 seconds to recalibrate. I'll be right back. I found my husband near the bar with 2 foundation board members laughing at something. I touched his elbow. He turned, saw my face, and excused himself. What's wrong? The seating, James. My parents have been moved to the garden room. He frowned. What? No, they're at table 2, I confirmed it. Well, someone unconfirmed it. Margot just told them they'd be more comfortable away from the main room. He pulled out his phone, scanning something. I'll fix it right now. I'll talk to Mom's assistant. Your mother did this, I said. Margot said she felt it would be better for the flow. His jaw tightened. I'm sure there's an explanation. The room configuration might have changed when the board added 2 new members and… James. My parents drove 4 hours. I know that. They're standing 20 feet away watching us have this conversation. Your mother moved them to a side room and told them they'd be more comfortable there. What does that mean to you? He lowered his voice. It means there was a seating issue and Mom handled it her way. You know how she is with these events. It's not personal. It is personal. It's entirely personal. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his version of stalling. Let me just go talk to her. Give me 5 minutes. Don't do anything. I watched him walk toward his mother's orbit. Catherine was speaking to an older man with silver cufflinks, and when James approached and bent to say something in her ear, she didn't stop her conversation. She held up one slim finger, wait, and finished her thought to the man, laughing at something, unhurried. Then she turned to her son with an expression of affectionate patience, the kind you give a child who keeps interrupting. I couldn't hear what they said. I watched James's posture, the slight slope of his shoulders, the way his hands came up in an explaining gesture and then fell. I watched his mother tilt her head and say something brief. I watched him nod. He came back to me with the particular expression of a man who has been given his answer and doesn't like it but is going to present it as reasonable. She says the main room is at capacity for the audio system with the speeches. Having extra guests causes feedback issues during the presentation. She moved a few people to the garden room and it happened to include your parents. She wasn't singling anyone out. Audio feedback, I said. He heard the tone in my voice. Nora. Out of 240 guests, the audio issue specifically affected my parents. He pressed his lips together. Look, the garden room is still part of the evening. They'll watch the speech on a monitor. They'll have the full dinner. I know it's not ideal. Not ideal. I almost laughed. My father has been in a suit since 6 this morning and my mother bought a new dress for the first time in 4 years because she wanted to be there when you were honored. and she is going to watch that on a monitor through a hallway. I said I'd fix it. You didn't fix it. Something shifted in his face. A door closing. I'll make it up to them. I'll bring them into the main room for dessert and the reception after, and it'll be fine. These events have a lot of moving pieces, Nora. Mom has been planning this for months. The audio thing is legitimate. Can we please just get through tonight? I looked at him for a long moment. The audio thing. He believed it, or he decided to believe it, which was the same as believing it for all practical purposes. That was the thing about my husband that I had spent 2 years slow cooking into something I could live with. He was a deeply intelligent man who had a profound and long-standing talent for finding the charitable interpretation of anything his mother did. I walked back to my parents. There's been a slight change, I said, keeping my voice easy. My mother looked at me carefully the way mothers look at daughters when they're deciding how much to understand. They'd like us in a smaller room off the main floor. More intimate, less noise. My father nodded slowly. Whatever's easiest, kiddo. That quiet accommodation. That particular grace of people who have spent a lifetime being told to make do, dressed up in dignity because that's what they had. It moved through me like a current. We let Margot walk us through the hallway. The garden room was beautiful, as advertised. Round tables, candlelight, a large screen on one wall already showing a feed from the main room. There were 6 other guests there, all of them, I noticed with a cold clarity. From my side of the room, people who had come as the plus ones or family members of the younger foundation staff. People who were not, to use a term I had not yet heard out loud but was beginning to understand viscerally, from the right world. I helped my mother to her seat. My father was already talking to the man beside him, asking about the plasterwork he'd noticed in the lobby. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the back of my mother's chair, and I looked at the screen showing the main room. I could see table 2. I could see my husband's empty chair. I could see the Whitmore Foundation board members and their wives and the significant donors and the people whose last names opened doors in this city, all arranged in the warm light of the room where the night was actually happening. I excused myself. I walked back out through the hallway, and I did not go into the main room. I went to the small coat room alcove near the elevator bank, and I called my best friend. She picked up on the second ring. I thought you had the thing tonight. I do. My parents are watching it on a television in a side room because my mother-in-law decided they were too much for the main event. A sharp silence. Then, where are you right now? A hallway. Has your husband done anything about it? He told me the audio system has feedback issues. My best friend made a sound that communicated exactly what she thought of that. Okay. Do you want tactical or do you want to vent? Tactical. She thought for 4 seconds. What's the most important thing in that room tonight? James's speech. The formal introduction as executive director. Who controls the foundation's public communications? Their press, their social, their announcements? I frowned. The communications director, a woman named Leslie. She went to school with Catherine. Why? Because, my best friend said, her voice sharpening into the particular focus she got when she was problem-solving, those foundation relationships are built on public image. The Whitmore Foundation exists because people believe in the Whitmore name, and right now, you are the only person in that building who knows what that name looks like, up close, in private, when no one from the press is watching. You don't have to blow anything up tonight, but you need to decide whether you are going to let tonight be the first of many nights like this, or whether you are going to do the thing you always do when someone tries to make your family small. What thing? Make them understand the cost. I stood in the alcove for another minute after I hung up. I thought about my mother's hand on my arm. I thought about my father looking at the ceiling plasterwork. I thought about my husband's door-closing expression and the way he'd said the audio thing is legitimate, like if he repeated it often enough it would become true. I walked into the main room. I found my mother-in-law near the foundation board, radiant and composed, holding a glass of champagne with the ease of a woman in her natural habitat. I said her name. She turned with the warm, controlled smile she kept specifically for me. Catherine, I need to understand something. Her eyes did a quick calculation. Of course, darling. What is it? My parents are in the garden room. Yes, the configuration. The audio configuration. I know. I'd like you to tell me honestly whether that's the real reason. A micro shift. Almost invisible. This is not the moment for this, Nora. I'd like an honest answer. She glanced around with the practiced instinct of someone who has spent decades managing scenes in public. Her voice dropped by half. Your parents are lovely people. They genuinely are. But you have to understand what tonight is. This is 40 years of foundation work. These are the people whose names are on hospital wings. Your father is a lovely man and your mother is sweet. But putting them at table 2 beside Congressman Hargrove and Judge Elaine Soto, it creates an awkward energy. It's about curation, Nora. It's about the overall picture. I heard the echo of a story I'd once been told about a different woman at a different event, and how those words, the overall picture, had preceded something she would not recover from quietly. An awkward energy, I repeated. You know what I mean. I do know what you mean. That's the problem. My mother-in-law's chin lifted by a degree. I am trying to protect tonight for James. For you. The right people are watching and I will not have. She stopped herself. You will not have what? I asked. Her mouth closed. Her expression became very smooth and very careful. I turned and walked toward the podium. The speeches were set to begin in 11 minutes. I knew this because the program was printed on heavy cream cardstock at every seat, and I had memorized it on the car ride over. I also knew that the Foundation's executive director traditionally opened the evening with welcoming remarks before the formal introduction, and that my husband had asked me to review his draft, and I had, and I knew it by heart. I knew something else. 3 weeks ago, in a meeting with the Foundation's communications director that I had attended as James's wife, sitting quietly in a chair against the wall while they discussed their annual giving campaign, I had mentioned an idea, a way to reframe their narrative around multi-generational community impact, not just legacy donors, but the working families whose neighborhoods the Foundation's grants actually served. Leslie had written it down and said it was interesting. Catherine had smiled at me with a particular smile she reserved for things she had no intention of using. Last week, without telling James, I had sent Leslie a full brief. A brand concept, a campaign framework, a proposed partnership with 2 organizations I'd been consulting for through my own work. I'd sent it because it was genuinely good work and because I am, before anything else, someone who does good work. Leslie had called me the following Tuesday. She'd said, "This is exactly what we've needed." My husband took the podium at 8:15. The room settled. He was composed and articulate and genuinely moved by the evening, and I watched him from the edge of the room and I remembered exactly why I had married him and exactly what tonight was costing me. The applause when he finished was warm and long. The Foundation's board chair, a white-haired man named Edward, took the podium next to formalize the introduction and invite remarks from the Foundation's partners. I had spoken to Edward briefly during cocktail hour. He had a firm handshake and kind eyes, and he'd told me my brief was the most interesting communication proposal they'd received in a decade. When his remarks concluded, there was a moment, a natural pause in the program, before the dinner service began. In that pause, I stepped forward. Excuse me. I did not have a microphone. I didn't need one. I had spent 3 years presenting brand strategy to rooms full of skeptical people, and I knew how to fill a space with my voice. The closest tables turned first. Then the ripple moved outward. "I'm sorry to step in," I said, my voice steady and clear, "especially tonight. I know how much work has gone into this evening and how meaningful it is to this family. I just want to add something before we sit down." My husband was looking at me from the podium area with an expression I had never seen on his face before. His mother, at table 1, had gone perfectly, dangerously still. "I've spent 2 years being welcomed into the Whitmore family," I continued, "and I've learned a great deal about legacy, about what it means to build something that lasts and who gets credit for that building." I smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Tonight, my parents are watching this room on a screen in a room down the hall because they were told the audio system couldn't accommodate them here. My father, who has spent 30 years in construction, who built with his hands the kind of community that the Whitmore Foundation has dedicated itself to serving on paper. My mother, who taught elementary school for 26 years in a district where the Foundation's early childhood grants went. They were curated out of this room because they created an awkward energy. A sound moved through the room. Not quite a gasp, more like a collective breath held. I am proud to be James's wife. I said it and I meant it, looking at him directly. But I am first and always my parents' daughter, and I cannot sit at a table of honor while they are hidden down a hallway. I also want Leslie and the board to know that the brand campaign I proposed last week, I'm withdrawing it. Not because I don't believe in this foundation's potential. I do, but I believe it deserves leadership that can look the communities it serves in the eye. And tonight I learned that the people running this foundation can't quite manage to look my parents in the eye across a dinner table. I set down the glass I'd been holding. "Mom, Dad," I said, not to the room, but loudly enough that the room heard every word. "I'll be in the garden room for the rest of the evening, because that's where my family is." I walked out of the main room. Behind me I heard the silence break into something low and urgent, the specific sound of 200 people processing something they would be discussing for months. I did not look back at my mother-in-law. I did not look back at my husband. I walked down the hallway and into the garden room, and when my father looked up from his conversation and saw my face, he stood up immediately the way fathers do when they understand without being told. I sat down between my parents. My mother took my hand under the table. On the screen across the room, I could see the main room still buzzing, the composed surface of the evening fractured in ways that all the calligraphy place cards in the world couldn't repair. The car ride back was not quiet. My husband sat beside me in the back seat with the stiff, controlled stillness of someone who had swallowed something sharp and was waiting to find out how much it would hurt. He didn't speak for 11 blocks. Then he said, "That was not the right way to handle that." I agreed with him. "What was the right way? You came to me. I told you I'd fix it. You told me the audio feedback was legitimate." He exhaled. Okay. You're right that it wasn't about audio. But there were better ways too. I wanted to know if you believed what she told you," I said. "Now I know. That's not fair. I believed her because I had no reason not to. You had every reason, James. You had the reason she's done this before. At your sister's birthday dinner when my parents were the only ones seated at a table without a number. At your cousin's graduation party when my mother was given a tour of the house by a staff member while everyone else had drinks on the lawn. You had years of reasons and you found the charitable interpretation every time. The silence that followed was different from the first one, heavier. My best friend was already at my apartment when we arrived. I texted her from the car. She had a bottle of wine and the particular expression she wore when she was ready for whatever came next. She and my husband had never been natural with each other. He found her too direct. She found him too managed. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. She looked at him, unhurried. "You want to be angry," she said, "which is understandable. But you might want to do that after you sat with the part where your mother told your wife's parents they had an uncomfortable vibe, and you called it an audio problem." He went to the kitchen. I heard him pour a glass of water. We stayed up until 1 a.m, my best friend and I, while my husband sat in the living room with his phone and the expression of a man rebuilding something in his head. My best friend helped me draft a formal withdrawal of the brand proposal with language careful enough not to be actionable and honest enough to mean something. She helped me list, in clean chronological order, every incident over 2 years of marriage where my family had been positioned as lesser. When you wrote it out, it was long. It was longer than I'd allowed myself to see. My husband read it the next day. I left it on the kitchen counter before I went to work. He called me at 11:30 and his voice was different. Quieter. Like someone had let some air out of the certainty he carried everywhere. "There's more than I thought," he said. "Yes, I didn't see it that way. I know." A pause. "I've been making excuses for her my whole life. He stopped. "It's what you do. When it's your mother." "Yes," I said. "I know that too." The fallout from the gala was swift in the way that small, wealthy social ecosystems are swift, concentrated, precise, and relayed in the specific language of concern. Leslie called me 2 days later. She said the board had questions about the circumstances around my public remarks. She said it in a careful, neutral tone, but I could hear underneath it the thing she actually meant, which was, what you said was true, and now we have to figure out what to do with that. I told her I understood and that I had nothing to add beyond what I'd said in the room. My mother-in-law did not call. She sent a text to my husband that I was shown because he had stopped hiding things from her and his phone. The text said, "What Nora did was a betrayal of this family. And if everything tonight was meant to represent, I hope you're helping her understand the consequences of making our private matters into a spectacle." My husband read it twice, put his phone face down on the table, and said, "I'm not doing that." It was the first time in 2 years I had heard him say no to her in a sentence without an apology attached to it. It was small. It was a beginning. The next 6 weeks were what I came to think of as the architecture of deciding, the slow, load-bearing work of figuring out what the structure of our marriage actually was and whether it could hold what I needed it to hold. My husband went to therapy. He had gone before, briefly, in his 20s, but this time he went with a specific purpose, which made it different. He came home from the 3rd session and sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "My therapist asked me to describe the first time I chose my mother's comfort over someone else's dignity, and I couldn't come up with just one." I reached across the table and took his hand. The brand campaign I had withdrawn was picked up in pieces by an organization I respected. I credited myself publicly. It led to 3 new client conversations and an invitation to speak on a panel about ethical branding that I accepted. My work, which had always been good, began to feel like mine again in a way that 2 years of being James's wife at the Hammersley Club had gradually, quietly eroded. My parents didn't ask about the gala in the weeks after. They asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether work was going well. My father called every Sunday at the same time he always called, and at the end of every call he said, "You did the right thing, kiddo," without my ever having to explain to him what right thing I had done or what it had cost me. He just knew, because he is my father, and he knows me, and that is what it means to come from the kind of people who were not, as it turns out, appropriate for table 2. My mother-in-law and I did not speak for 3 months. When we finally did, it was at a Sunday lunch my husband had arranged at a restaurant he'd chosen himself, not one of his mother's places. She arrived without her usual armor, the Valentino, the specific social smile, and looked in a way I found genuinely strange to see, like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had recently put it down without knowing where else to put it. She said, "I handled the seating poorly." I said, "Yes." She said, "I have opinions about how things should be that I've never questioned." She said it like someone reading a sentence they'd written and were not quite sure about. "Your parents are very—" She paused. "Your father asked Edward 3 questions about the lobby ceiling restoration at the after reception, and apparently Edward talked to him for 40 minutes and called it the best conversation he'd had all evening." I smiled. "My father knows his ceilings." She looked at her hands. "I didn't give them a chance." "No," I said, "you didn't. We didn't hug when we said goodbye. We didn't make promises." But when she left, she stopped at the door and turned and said, "I'd like to have dinner, the 4 of us. A proper one. Your parents included if they're willing." "I'll ask them," I said. The dinner happened on a Saturday in March at my parents' house in Dayton. My mother made pot roast, and my father opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving. My mother-in-law sat at a kitchen table for the first time in years, I suspected, and ate pot roast and talked to my mother about the school district my mother had taught in and the grant work the foundation had done there. And there was a moment in the middle of that conversation where I saw something in Catherine's face that I had never seen there before, which was the particular expression of someone realizing they have been wrong about something for a very long time. My husband watched his mother and my mother talking across that kitchen table, and then he looked at me, and the thing in his eyes was complicated and real and not yet finished, the way growth never is. "I know," I said quietly. He nodded. Months later, on a Tuesday morning when the light was coming through the kitchen windows in that particular way it does in early November, I was reviewing a campaign proposal for a new client when my husband came in and set a coffee in front of me and said, "I'm proud of you." And I mean that differently now than I did when I used to say it. I looked up. "I used to be proud of you, the way you're proud of something that reflects well on you," he said. "That's not what this is anymore. I'm proud of you, the way you're proud of someone who is braver than you are and is trying to teach you something." I held the coffee in both hands. Outside, the city was loud and ordinary and going about its business. "I think you're learning," I said. "I'm trying," he said. That has always been the difference between the people I come from and the people I married into. Not money, not address, not the name on the building. The difference is that my people say I'm trying and they mean it, and then they do the work, not because anyone is watching, but because it is the right thing, and because the people they love are watching, which is the only audience that has ever mattered. My mother still calls every Wednesday. My father still builds things with his hands. I still do work I believe in. And at Christmas last year, my mother-in-law drove to Dayton and sat at that same kitchen table and brought nothing from Tiffany. Just a loaf of bread she had made herself from a recipe she said had been her own grandmother's, and she put it in the center of the table, and my mother cut it, and we ate it together, and nobody said anything about the Hammersley Club or table, or the garden room, because some things are better understood in silence, in a warm kitchen over bread that someone made with their hands. I didn't burn anything down in the end. I just refused to become invisible. And it turned out that refusing to become invisible, when done calmly and with precision and in front of the right 200 people, was enough to change the only things that mattered. Not the foundation's seating chart, not the Whitmore family's social calendar, the 3 feet of space between my husband and his mother's expectations, the look in his eyes now when we eat Sunday dinner with my parents, easy and present and no longer translating. I'll take 3 feet. I'll take the look in his eyes. I'll take the bread on the table. These are the things that outlast the marble lobbies and the calligraphy place cards and every careful, curated room that was never built for people like us to matter in.